Welcome to The Explainer. So, have you ever wondered how to actually move beyond just basic rote memorization and make learning stick for good? I mean, really stick? Well, today we are unpacking a literally transformative concept in education that does exactly that. We're talking about contextual teaching and learning. We're going to explore exactly how to bridge that massive gap between classroom theory and real-world application, and we'll look at everything from the foundational theories all the way down to some highly practical classroom strategies. Okay, let's dive right into this. The entrepreneur Gary Vaynerchuk famously said that in the business world, context is the new king. He was specifically talking about using technology to provide a solution exactly when people need help. Well, guess what? The exact same principle applies to education. Think about it. When new information arrives at the precise moment a student actually needs it to solve a problem or to understand their world, the whole dynamic changes. They react, they engage, and that is when real learning actually happens. So think of contextual teaching and learning, or CTL for short, as the ultimate bridge between your classroom and the real world out there. It's an approach that directly relates whatever subject matter you're teaching to authentic, everyday situations. It gives students a tangible reason to make connections between their academic knowledge and their actual lives. Because, let's be honest, kids just do not want to learn in a vacuum. If they don't see a clear why or a tangible reason for learning something, their brains just aren't going to hold on to it. Here is our roadmap for today. We're breaking this down into 6 quick parts: the power of context, theories and big thinkers, context in IB standards, primary and middle strategies, high school strategies, and finally, action and service. All right, part 1, the power of context. Think about trying to build muscle. You can read a textbook, you can memorize all the biology, and you could probably ace a written test on it. But if you want your muscles to actually grow, you have to hit the gym and lift heavy things, right? Theory requires practice, and the exact same thing goes for something like learning a language. Say you memorize the German word mag, which means likes. If you just learn that in total isolation, you're probably going to forget it by tomorrow. But if you learn it in the sentence Mama mag kokosnuss, Mom likes coconut, you instantly give it context. Your brain links that new word to memories of a mother and of a coconut. You've essentially created a situational memory that actually sticks. Moving right along to part 2, theories and big thinkers. Now, what's really interesting about this is that this approach isn't just some modern passing educational trend. It's built on decades of solid cognitive science. You've got Dewey and Piaget, who laid the groundwork for constructivism, which is the idea that students actually construct their own knowledge by testing out ideas. Then you have Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, which really emphasizes the social interaction side of learning. And looking at more recent thinkers, you have H. Lynn Erickson with concept-based curriculum, and Aline B. Johnson, who basically reminds us that connection leads to meaning, and meaning is what makes these studies actually come alive for kids. We are talking about a massive paradigm shift here. We are completely moving away from old-school traditional behaviorism. You know the vibe: rows of silent desks, drilling random facts for a Friday test. Instead, we're moving toward constructivism, and this is where learning gets messy. It gets social and deeply interconnected. The learners are out there actively manipulating information and solving authentic problems, instead of just sitting there passively receiving data. So the absolutely crucial point here is how we actually get students from those basic, foundational facts all the way up to higher order thinking. If you look at H. Lynn Erickson's concept-based curriculum evolution, it starts with isolated facts at the very bottom, sure, but then it groups them into transferable concepts. Then those concepts interact to form generalizations, which eventually lead to an overarching theory. It builds this incredible synergy. So instead of asking a boring factual question like, what was the Cold War, you start asking an essential conceptual question, something like, how do we define conflict? Which brings us to part 3, context in IB standards. And this brilliantly illustrates how the International Baccalaureate actually handles this. In the IB, these constructivist ideas aren't just polite suggestions, they are strictly mandated. The IB seamlessly threads context through every single age group. So in the primary years program, or PYP, context is framed through transdisciplinary themes. In the middle years program, or MYP, it's driven by global contexts. And then up in the diploma and career-related programs, those contexts shift to academic, personal, professional, and global settings. It is a highly continuous, structured thread from kindergarten all the way to graduation. Just taking a closer look at the middle school level for a second, these are the 6 official global contexts for the MYP.
Every single unit taught has to connect to one of these. And what's super exciting is that with the enhanced MYP updates, teachers now have even more pedagogical flexibility to craft these really authentic inquiry questions using these contexts, rather than feeling boxed in by rigid compliance rules.
Okay, part 4, primary and middle strategies. Let's look at a really fantastic, concrete example of how this physically changes the classroom. Imagine you're teaching an MYP science unit on energy. If you choose the context of fairness and development, your students might investigate how fossil fuel usage impacts different marginalized populations, or how we can provide clean energy to developing nations. But if you take that exact same scientific topic of energy and view it through the lens of personal and cultural expression, your students might be challenged to design wind turbines or solar panels that are actually aesthetically pleasing and culturally desirable. The scientific facts remain exactly the same, but the context completely changes the focus of their inquiry. Now, it's vital to note how this is different from standard problem-based learning. In PBL, the specific problem is the context itself. But in IB programs, these overarching contexts, like identities and relationships, for example, repeat across totally different subjects and grade levels. A student will encounter the exact same context in science, and then later in art, and then over in history. That repetition is what builds a deeply connected, multifaceted worldview over time.
Let's move up to part 5, high school strategies.
Let's move to and see how this builds when we get to the older students. How do we get students in the diploma or career-related programs to effectively transfer their learning to completely new situations? Well, Edutopia provides a really fantastic 3-step strategy to kickstart this kind of transfer learning. First, you present the students with multiple contexts that are linked to the standard. Second, you use a structured protocol, think something like a jigsaw or a think, pair, share, just to get them talking. And third, you give them specific prompts, asking things like to what extent or should we, to really push their thinking beyond the specific example and into that broader conceptual realm. Another really cool, highly effective strategy is creating analogous problems. When high schoolers are forced to generate their own analogies from a provided example, or if they have to apply newly learned concepts to totally fictitious scenarios, they are actively manipulating that information in their minds. And that mental manipulation? That is the secret sauce that permanently cements abstract conceptual knowledge right into their long-term memory. Finally, part 6, action and service. Across the entire IB continuum, this kind of experiential learning is brought to life through action in the PYP, services action in the MYP, and creativity activities service in the DP. When students take their classroom academic learning and actually go apply it to a real-world community need, it completely grounds those abstract concepts. It develops not just their academic skills, but their international mindedness and the core attributes of the learner profile. The community itself literally becomes the learning context. That wraps up our explainer for today. But before we go, I want to leave you with one final absolutely crucial question to ask yourself. Why are we engaged in this inquiry? Because, honestly, if your students don't know the answer to that, the learning simply isn't going to stick. So, how will you contextualize your next lesson?